Thanks very much indeed, everyone. Thanks for coming back, those of you who were in our excellent first session this morning, and welcome to this session, which is on accessing archives and libraries and digital repositories. My name is Chris Williams. I'm the Vice Chair of the Irish Humanities Alliance, and it's my privilege to be chairing this session. We have 4 speakers. I will be introducing them very briefly in just a minute, and they'll be speaking for 10 minutes or so in each case, one after the other, and then we'll have some time for questions. So please do use the chat facility to post questions, and we'll try and make sure that we get through as many of those as we can in the course of the hour. But just by way of an introduction to this session about libraries and archives, I think we were all just commenting before this session began on how much we've missed being in libraries and archives, for many of us anyway, over the months of the pandemic. And I was reminded of the particular culture, if you like, and the atmosphere of libraries yesterday, because I was reading a book for review, and it's about the history of Swansea University, where I used to work in Wales. And one of the most famous former members of staff of Swansea University was the writer Kingsley Amis, who found fame with his book Lucky Jim, which was really about the kind of adventures of a junior lecturer in medieval history. But he followed that up with a book called That Uncertain Feeling. And the central character in That Uncertain Feeling was a librarian. And at one point in the novel, he makes the librarian list the main duties of a librarian, which are, and I'll read these out because I'm sure it's exactly the same now as it was then in 1955, to see that the date stamps are correctly set, the corridors swept, the newspaper room free from unemployed and undesirables, the town clerk promptly informed of all books not returned after 3 months, the fine tickets always at hand for borrowers with whom I am unacquainted, a 5% random sample of fiction regularly catalogued as biography and memoirs, and a 25% selected sample of essays and belles lettres catalogued as fiction. Now, I would imagine things have improved since the mid-1950s, and certainly we have a great appreciation of librarians and archives, much better, I'm sure, than Kingsley Amis did. So with that out of the way, let me just introduce our 4 speakers this morning. First of all, we have Kate Manning, who is Principal Archivist at UCD Archives and also a member of the Irish Manuscripts Commission. And Kate will be followed by Katherine McSharry, who is Deputy Director and Head of Development at the National Library of Ireland, and previously Special Collections Librarian at UCD, followed by Martin Morris, who is Archivist at County Longford Library and Archives and was recently Chair of the Local Government Archivists and Records Managers. And then finally, we have Amy Boylan, and Amy is Assistant Librarian at Marsh's Library in Dublin, which of course I think is first public library in Ireland, having been established in 1707. So each of them will speak on the theme, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and over to Kate to begin.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Mel for the invitation to speak today. I think this is a really good thing, and I hope this kind of event continues. It's always good for librarians, archivists, and historians and researchers to meet up. I'm going to give some background on archives in general to help you understand what archivists do, some general pointers on working efficiently in archives and how to make the best use of your time, and then talk about accessing archives with some comments on private paper collections which we curate. I will deal with archives in an Irish context, but many of the same principles apply to archives around the world. The world of digitally born material brings its own set of challenges. Obviously, carrying out research during a pandemic has fundamentally changed the way both archivists and researchers work. Online access has developed via digital repositories and access to online collections. This is still less than ideal, and in our case, searchable online PDF catalogues on our website enabled us to provide a request and scan service to allow researchers to continue their work. This service has worked well for us and our users, but there are lots of factors which mitigate against a service like that being offered. Being prepared is the best advice I can give you in these circumstances. So, a general introduction to archives. What are archives? Archives are an accumulation of records and documents from one organization or individual and are the byproducts of the activities and functions of that organization or individual. Archivists use the French term fond to describe the aggregation of documents that originate from the same source. This roughly equates to the term collection. Respect des fonds is a fundamental principle for the archivist in both appraisal and cataloging. It means respect for the source or the creator and is concerned with preserving the integrity of the collection. Arranging archival materials is rooted in this principle and two related principles, provenance and original order. The principle of provenance demands that the archives of one organization or person not be combined with the archives of another. And the principle of original order is most obvious in institutional records, where the need for retrieval is a necessary part of the creation and use of records. Private papers, however, very often show little evidence of original order. Where this cannot be discerned, archivists may impose order to facilitate research. Both principles are important for researchers because they provide evidential value and are important in supplying context. Finding aids are the tools which provide access to archival material. These take many different forms and serve a variety of purposes. The type and level of sophistication of finding aids in a given archives will depend on available resources and the nature of the collection being catalogued. In UCD Archives, our primary finding aid is the descriptive catalogue. Finding the archives that you need. Footnotes and bibliographies provide important information on sources. The Archives and Records Association Ireland maintain a list of archive services online, which provide public access. This list includes a link to each repository's website with the access policies and opening hours and collections available, and so on. In general, websites are a helpful first port of call for up-to-date, reliable information on access policies, opening hours, and collections available. The 5th edition of the Directory of Irish Archives, although now out of date, lists some 250 repositories and organizations, educational, religious, cultural, and governmental, which holds records of historical significance and are open to the public. Published guides are also useful. Social media, particularly Twitter, is used increasingly by archives to promote collections, especially newly available collections, and to inform users about forthcoming closures, etc. And talk to archivists. We are there to help you. That's our job. And anything we know about collections that are about to become open or about to become available, we will let you know. What to expect? Not all archives are created equal. The collections you wish to use may be housed in a large, fully staffed repository, we can dream, or they may be maintained in a one-person operation. There are variations to opening hours, levels of staffing, levels of cataloging, and so on. This is all compounded by the pandemic and managing a safe reading room for both staff and users. Although there is more and more online access to archives in Ireland, it is still the case that the majority of archives must be consulted in a supervised reading room, for which you will be required to complete some form of registration process. Restrictions gaining access. All archives have policies on governing access to their records. Public archives, such as the National Archives, are open to public by legislation. In-house archives, such as those caring for the records of businesses or private institutions, may allow access only to their own employees or provide restricted access to researchers. It is possible that records which you wish to consult will not be available to you. Depositors may place restrictions on records. And this is important to note. Archivists balance the rights and needs of depositors with the rights and needs of researchers. For example, an individual's private papers may be closed to researchers for a specified period following their death as part of the terms of deposit. The archives itself may have to restrict records which contain personal information about a person other than the depositor. Records which are in poor physical condition may be withdrawn until they are restored by a conservator. In most archives, unprocessed material, that is, collections which have not been catalogued, will not be made available to researchers. There are many reasons for this, including the security of the collection, the inability to properly reference documents, and managing copyright and data protection concerns. Depending on the resources of an archives and the backlog of work, it may take several years to make a new acquisition available. I can't stress enough how valuable it is to do detailed catalogue work in advance of your visit to an archives, if this is at all possible. Not only will such work help you to identify the material you wish to consult, it will help you estimate how much time to allow for your work. If you have to travel to consult archives, this is a really good use of your time, especially now. If a reading room has to close at short notice, this work won't go to waste. You'll be ready when it reopens. Some note-taking tips. It's more difficult to recover citations from documents than from books. Revisiting an archives is not always an option, so attention should be paid to the accuracy of note-taking. Accurate citations are important because they allow consultation of the same material in the future. You should note the name of the archival institution, the correct name of the archival collection consulted, i.e. the name ascribed by the institution, and the exact reference number of the items consulted. So I have an example there. So the full reference for the first time might be something along the lines of UCD Archives, Papers of Eamon de Valera, P151. So P150 is the collection code for Eamon de Valera, and in the context of UCD Archives, that means anything with P150 start with as the start of the reference numbers mean it comes from de Valera's papers. Number one is just that that's the first item. And then your second citation might simply be UCDA P150/2 and so on. Copies, whether photocopies or digital copies, are provided within the limits of copyright legislation and only if the condition of the material allows it. Charges may apply, and you should factor this into the time you allot to a given archives. It is often better to spend a day in the archives than an hour and request lots of copies. Spend a lot of money and end up with a lot of documents to read at home that you may not have needed in the first place. Copyright is a complex issue for both archive services and researchers. Archive services do not, in many instances, own or administer the copyright in collections deposited in their archives, although we may be able to advise you. It is your responsibility to secure the permission of copyright owners and comply with copyright law in all other respects. You should allow adequate lead time for researching ownership and obtaining permission to publish. GDPR concerns a living individual's right to privacy. It is a complex and important regulation. It is your responsibility to ensure that the personal data contained in any archives to which you are being granted access is used solely for the purpose for which you are carrying out your research. Political private paper collections is basically what we do. Our collection profile centres on a core of political private papers of individuals who have held positions of influence in Irish life, and on the archives of organisations such as political parties, trades unions, sporting and cultural bodies. We have a significant set of collection clusters, a lot of related material, a lot of collections where subjects are covered across more than one collection. This is something that you need to pay attention to. So with us, we have a significant amount of material relating to the Irish Revolution, on presidents, so Eamon de Valera and Ciarán Dálaigh, Taoiseach, political parties, ministers for external and foreign affairs, diplomats, attorneys general, Republican women like Sheila Humphreys, Ethna Coyle, Mary McSweeney, Elgin O'Rahilly, Kathleen Barry Maloney, and so on. We also hold a large category of papers from individuals who did not hold office, whose careers were often against the consensus, collections that document the anti-government position, like Ernie O'Malley, Mary McSweeney, Moss Toomey, and Sheila Humphreys. We follow a 30-year rule because many of the collections that we have contain material which originated in government departments and often in departments other than those for which the individual held responsibility. This means that UCD Archives holds many collections which are not available. And as I said before, we do not make available uncatalogued collections. We prepare a descriptive catalogue to secure the collections and provide intellectual control in order for you to negotiate the collection. All available collections are listed on our website. If it's not there, it's not available. Some collections require depositor permission to access the papers, and this is noted on the website. It is important to note that you should not make assumptions about the content of a collection until you have consulted the website descriptions and the descriptive catalogues. You should not assume that because an individual was involved in a certain area or exercised responsibilities for a specific function, that will be documented in their papers. The absence of material may be deliberate or the result of a natural disinclination to retain material. There's some crossover with our collections in the National Archives, where we hold ministerial papers, the NA holds departmental records, for example. It is, however, entirely unpredictable when you come to dealing with private paper collections. You need to examine finding aids without preconceived notions. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kate. That's really helpful. And some of that advice I'm sure I would have benefited from had I had access to it at the beginning of my career. So thank you very much. And we'll now move on to Katherine McSharry.
So thanks again, thanks to Mel, thanks to everybody for the opportunity to talk to you today. We haven't seen nearly as many people as we would normally over the course of this year, so it's a great opportunity to be able to do it, even if it's not quite in person in the way that we might like as yet. I'm going to talk to you today about the National Libraries collections, and particularly a kind of high-level understanding of how you can start to think about them for using your research. And the first thing that I would say is that the vision of the National Library is to share the story of Ireland with the world through our unique collections. So I love the collection material that we have. I'm fascinated by the process by which we acquire it, but I don't think any of that matters at all if we're not sharing it. So it is the process by which you as researchers, by which many other people come to explore the collections that is at the core of what we're trying to do. My own background, and I thought this was interesting perhaps in thinking about how I presented the material today in the National Library, cuts across digital programs, so a range of digital projects, across exhibition projects, so big projects, an exhibition about Seamus Heaney, which is running at the Bank of Ireland Cultural and Heritage Centre on Westmoreland Street, our partnership project with UCD, the Museum of Literature Ireland, and also communications and advocacy. And the reason that I raise that is because all three of those things require quite substantial amounts of research in the collections. So while I'm on the inside, I'm also someone who does a lot of work researching. And so I suppose what I'm presenting to you today is my own hard experience working with the National Libraries collection. I'm also going to focus on remote access. So that's not just because of the moment in which we find ourselves. I'm happy to say that the National Library is open again. Our reading rooms are open, although with restricted numbers to allow for physical and social distancing. But because being aware of what you can do when you're not on site allows you to manage your time when you are on site in the most effective possible way. So for all of us, I think it is a wonderful aspiration to have all the time in the world to be in an archive or to be in a library and to make your way through in a leisurely way. But very often that's not how things are in real life. So it's important, I think, to have a sense of what you can do before you come in. I'm going to look at 4 areas: at our online catalogue, at our newspaper database, at the sources database, and at our web archive. So this is not the full picture in terms of what's available to you remotely, but it's what I would like to focus in on in the time that we have available. I will also touch at the end on a secret ingredient, the secret ingredient that can be the secret to unlocking all of your research. So hopefully that'll keep you here until the end of the 10 minutes. In terms of our online catalogue then, so the National Libraries catalogue, and I've given you the URL there, is our primary discovery mechanism for all of our collections. We have more than 10 million items in the National Library, and that ranges from the type of content that you might expect: manuscripts, books, periodicals, newspapers, through to prints, drawings, photographs, music, maps, and increasingly digital material. And most of those 10 million items are represented in some way in the catalogue, whether they are catalogued at the individual level or whether they are represented by a very high level collection record that describes the collection because they haven't yet been described in greater detail. And one of the things that's really useful when you search the catalogue, when you go to our catalogue and look for the areas that are of interest to you, is that you will get links. So you will see collections that have been catalogued, but also you may see a link out, for example, to a detailed archival list showing a full collection listing. And the catalogue brings you to that listing. Another area which I think is really useful is a piece of work that was done by my colleague Ono Carragon, who's now in UCC, a number of years ago. And that was to integrate links into the catalogue to what is digitally available. And what I mean by that, I'll show you here. If you had looked up this piece by Jenny Weiss-Power about Charles Stewart Parnell and The Words of the Dead Chief, a book that's in the National Library's collections, you would also see, and it is highlighted here with the arrow, that there is an option to click out of the National Library's catalogue to freely available digital resources. So whether that's in Google Books or in the Hathi Trust, if a digital copy of a book is available freely, we will be able to show you that. So you don't need to come into the National Library to view that item. You can go and look at it straight away if you wish to. The second thing to draw your attention to in terms of the online catalogue is that there are 125,000 plus items digitised out of the collections. So that's a lot of material, but out of 10 million items, it's that terrible phrase, a lot done, more to do. However, it does mean that those items are available to you digitally. Some of them are in copyright. The ones that are in copyright, you cannot see from home. Everything else you can see from your device wherever you are. It's worth getting in contact with us if an item is digitized and you see a message that says it's in copyright. We may be able to help you further. The other thing that you can see through our catalogue are enriched records, particularly from our Flickr Commons work. So Flickr Commons is a photo sharing site, and the National Library has about 2,500 photographs available through that site. It's run for us by volunteers, and through it, we community source huge amounts of information about individual photographs. And there's an area where you can think about whether we can help you. So here's a photograph of Michael Collins at the Leinster hurling final. And this is a photograph about which we discovered a huge amount more through our Flickr community. And there's an integration that draws that information from Flickr straight into our catalogue. It's also possible, if you find a photograph in our collections that you'd like to know more about, that our Flickr volunteers can post it on Flickr and hopefully generate more information for you in that way. I wanted to draw your attention next to the sources database. And the sources database was prepared from original material compiled in the 60s and 70s. It shows all National Library manuscripts catalogued up to the 1980s, a range of manuscripts held worldwide, and also the indexed content of articles, reviews, and other content from over 150 Irish periodicals up to 1969. So there's a huge range of material there. And while none of that is digitized, again, it gives you a broad understanding of your area. It enables you to focus in on specific areas of interest, and it allows you to prepare before you make your research visit to the National Library. I'd also like to highlight our web archive. So you can see the URL there. Much of the contemporary memory of Ireland is being created online, but in any given year, over 80% of websites will be gone or changed. So that's a huge amount of incredibly important research material that's disappearing all the time. So the National Library carries out selective web archiving. We identify websites associated with a particular moment, event, theme in Irish life, and we archive those so that they can be clicked through exactly as you do in your browser. And so, for example, thinking about this year, we've had a lot of collecting around COVID on the web and the Irish experience of the pandemic. You can see the web archive there, which we carry out with our partners at the Internet Archive. There's also lots more that can be explored. There's the parish registers online. There's our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram profiles. We have online exhibitions. We have a family history booklet with lots of really useful information about how to go about carrying out your research. We have tours. We have online events that may be significant for your particular domain. And all of those, I think, are worth exploring. But a key piece I wanted to draw your attention to is a secret ingredient, and Kate has already mentioned this, and that is people. Events like today, networking activities, and reaching out to archivists, librarians, people whom you know in an archive, so that you can draw on their expertise and not spend 2 days trying to find something that someone else can find for you in 2 minutes. And I've given you a range of options here for getting in contact to our librarian on duty, our archivist on duty. I've given you my own details. I'm always happy to take queries and to pass them on equally happily to my colleagues, our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram profiles, and also our phone number. So really, as I said, a whistle-stop tour there, and we're always delighted to work with you to give you more information and to take any, and there's my timer, and to take any queries through the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Katherine. That's great, and I can certainly attest to the great value of the access from the catalogue to digital versions. That's something I've made a great deal of use of. Thank you. We'll now pass on to Martin Morris. Martin.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chris, and to everyone else. I'm delighted to be here to participate in this training event. And as other speakers have said, it is a great opportunity for us to share information about what we're doing and hopefully to be helpful to people. A lot of the people who are tuning in, I think, will be familiar with local archives. Now, Kate has done a wonderful introduction to the area of archives generally, and I'm not going to repeat any of what she has said, but what I'm going to talk about particularly is the work of the local authority archive services. Now, I'm employed by Longford County Council, and as Chris mentioned earlier on, I'm also a member of the Local Government Archivists and Records Managers Group, which is the network which is made up of all the professionally qualified archivists and records managers working in local government in the country. And the local archive services, I suppose, to put them into context, outside of the national institutions such as the National Archives and the National Library, the local authority services would have the largest catchment area in Ireland by far. And I'll go on and talk a little bit about the mandate that we have. Our mandate derives from legislation. The Local Government Acts of 1994 and 2001 each has a section concerning local archives and records. And I have a quotation there from Section 80 of the 2001 Act, which says that it is a function of each local authority essentially to arrange for proper management and care of its archives and records, and also for inspection by the public of local archives. And that's the aspect that is of most interest to the people who are listening in this afternoon. But of course, care and management will always come before access, as Kate has alluded to. And over the more than 25 years since the first act, the 1994 Act, the majority of local authorities in the country have employed archivists at some point or another. But the difficulty is, unfortunately, that not all of those posts have been retained. Now, to illustrate what I was saying, I'm putting up there the list of the services that exist as of now, and there are 18 in total. There is one other local authority, it's Galway City Council, that has a records management service. Now, the person who is there is a qualified archivist. Most of us who work within the sector are archivists and records managers both. Most of us provide both services to our employers, but in one instance, and that's Galway City, as I say, the service is records management exclusively. And that person would not generally provide a public service to researchers. Now, a question that might be asked is, where are services located within the local authorities? And there is some variation in that. Probably the majority are either within libraries or else are under the same roof as a library service. Examples there would include my own in Longford, Dublin City, County Galway, County Kerry, Fingal and Dundleary Rathdown. Others are in council buildings. They have shared buildings with other offices of the local authority. For example, Donegal, Wicklow, Limerick and Clare. In one instance, Tipperary, the archive is in the same building as the County Museum. And there are a few services that are in standalone premises, such as Cork City and County Archives, Louth County Archives, and also Offaly. Now, what kind of collections do we hold? Well, all of the services hold broadly the same types of collection, and they fall into two categories. First of all, local authority collections, including those of what we call the predecessor bodies, the local authorities that no longer exist, and there are many of those. Grand jury, boards of poor law guardians, rural district councils, town councils, and some others. And we also hold the archives of the present local authorities, in other words, our employers, be they county councils or city councils. And I think it's worth mentioning that perhaps these collections are underestimated and certainly underused. It's about 200 years since democratic local government was first introduced in Ireland. And over those 2 centuries, local authorities have delivered a range of services to the people of the country. And the collections reflect the work of the authorities, and that work and those functions have increased and become more complex as the years have gone on. With regard to the private collections, again, there's a multitude. The landed estates collections would be familiar to many of you, I'm sure. They would include, for example, rent books and account books and legal documents, also the family papers of some of the landed families themselves. Local business collections, including perhaps ledgers and correspondence from shops and other types of business. School records. In recent years, we have all become more assiduous in our determination to identify particularly national school collections, because from the point of view of local history and genealogy, they are of major significance. And in terms of the types of researcher that we facilitate, obviously academics and students at various levels would account for a significant part of our researcher cohort, but also we're catering very much for the genealogists and the local historians. And school records are very popular. We collect the records of local organisations, voluntary and community bodies, sporting organisations. And most services have a number of personal collections, and some of those are particularly interesting because they could be, for example, the papers of antiquarians and local historians. Now, the issue of access is a very important one, and Kate has given a very good, I suppose, summation of the general principles that are applied, and those same principles are applied at local level. In recent years, most services would have invested significantly in digitization. As you can imagine, it has become almost a core part of our work. Now, not all of the material that has been digitized is available online. For various reasons, some services have not gone that route as yet. To give you some examples of material that is available online, for example, this example here is from Dublin City Archives, and it's something that may be familiar to some of you. The city electoral rolls, or a portion of them at least, have been digitized, and they're also searchable. Now, in preparing this contribution yesterday, I picked the name John Kenny and I entered it, and you can see the first number of results there. And on the right-hand side, when you click on image, you'll get an image of the roll where John Kenny is mentioned, or all the different instances of his name. Another example of online access is Donegal. In this instance, the titles of the different items or collections, let's say the Fanet Health Club District Nursing Association, when you click on that, you get into a description of the item and then a link to the digitized copy of that particular archive. And moving on then to cataloging, and again, Kate mentioned the importance of using the catalogs that are available. Now, there are different levels of cataloguing that can be done, and the most useful catalogue is the item level descriptive list. I would have several of those here in the research room. When someone comes in, they're given the descriptive list to refer to, and they will order their document on the basis of it. And that's the same in the vast majority of services. Some also have electronic catalogues that are available online, but many services will have what we call the fawn or collection level description. And this is an example of one from our own service here. Dr. John F. Keenan was a major antiquarian stroke local historian in Longford, and this is as an overview of his collection. And you can see there mention of the extent is 5 boxes, and there are 8 outsized items. Below that again, there's a biographical statement who Dr. Keenan was, and that's really important context for understanding the documents or the archives that he created during his life and work. And further down on in that description, there's an overview of the arrangement of the collection. So the researcher will get an idea of what kind of material actually has survived from this man. Now, some of you will be familiar with the portal, which is the IHA, the Irish Archives resource. And this is another example of a Longford entry, which we have on the IAR, and it's the Edgeworth papers. This is another collection level description here. The Edgeworths were a major local family. They were a landed family. They were involved in science and the arts and various areas of life. And we are fortunate to have a small collection of material, particularly relating to the author Maria Edgeworth. And again, the same idea, an overview of the collection. And this kind of entry will give a way into the collection for the researcher. Now, as Kate mentioned already, access is governed by a number of considerations. We observe the 30-year rule at local level. We also close material which is subject to data protection, to considerations of privacy and confidentiality, and where material is particularly fragile. In some cases, collections will be either conserved or digitized before they're made available. Now, a point that was made already by the previous 2 speakers, and I would reiterate it, is that the pandemic has changed the way we work. Obviously, physical access is more limited and more restricted than it was. It's difficult to summarize the situation with regard to the local services because each one has its own circumstances. Some of them have limited opening hours. We have limited access here as well. But please do contact your archivist prior to considering a visit, because they will tell you exactly what the position is. And also they will look at how they can help you without you having to come physically. If there's something that has already been digitized, I'm sure they'll be happy to provide that to you, a copy of that to you, or file it for you. Also, in some circumstances, it's possible to digitize small amounts of material in response to a request that has been made by a researcher. Now, I suppose moving away from that area of access, to say that also the local government services are involved in outreach. We work on exhibitions, publications, educational projects, and as a unit, we work together on a number of initiatives. Now, all of us are involved in the Decade Centenaries programs, which are being delivered through the local authorities primarily. And the local government archivists and records managers were involved with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. The departmental names keep changing, but that's the recent incarnation of it. We produced a booklet on the 1920 local elections. And that booklet is based to a large extent on the material in our collections, and it's available online through the websites of most of the services that you would have seen on the list. So with that, I'll finish and I'll say thank you for your attention.
So thanks very much, everyone, for organising this and for everyone's contribution so far. So I'll probably just be sort of repeating a few things that people have said, and then just kind of giving it from a little bit more detail, sort of from Marsh's perspective. So as Chris said, Marsh's library is Ireland's oldest public library, and we've been open since 1707. But that being said, we're actually closed to readers at the moment. But we are ostensibly going to open on the 5th of January. and you know, depending on public health guidelines and everything like that. But hopefully from the 5th of January, we'll be back to something sort of resembling normality in the reading room. So what I'm going to talk about then is a little bit, I'm going to give you sort of a general overview of our collections, so you can decide whether or not they'd be relevant to your study, how you'd access material normally, then what's available digitally, and how we can help you to access things that aren't kind of publicly available, but that we have access to, and we can kind of help you get access to these. Okay, so our collections, we have 4 main collections, comprising about 25,000 books that were printed between 1475 and 1750. So these belonged to 4 different private collectors. And our biggest collection by far, of about 10,000 books, belonged to the Bishop of Worcester, Edward Stillingfleet, and that was bought by Narcissus Marsh when he was Archbishop of Dublin to form the core of Marsh's library. So all 4 collections were collected by clergymen, and they have quite similar themes, but they each have their own strengths. So Stillingfleet's has a particularly nice collection of travel books, natural history, and then he also has quite a lot of antiquities, law related material as well. And then all 4 collections have a lot of Bibles, commentaries on Bibles, commentaries and commentaries on Bibles, that kind of thing that you would expect in the collections of clergymen. Then the second collection belonged to our first librarian, Eli Bourreau, and he was a French Huguenot refugee who came over to Ireland at the end of the 17th century when the Edict of Nantes was revoked. So his collection, again, Bibles, commentaries and Bibles, all that kind of thing, but he was also a practicing doctor in La Rochelle. So we have a lot of early modern medical books and a lot of quite rare, sometimes unique French material as well. Then the third collection belonged to Archbishop Narcissus Marsh himself. It was something of a polymath, but particularly his particular interests were in mathematics and Oriental languages. So we have a lot of maths books in his collections, early mathematics, quite a substantial collection of Hebrew books, and then books in Aramaic and Coptic and Syriac and lots of other Eastern languages. Then the last collection to come in belonged to John Stern, who was the Bishop of Clogher, and that was sort of our last donation in 1745. And there are some quite nice examples of early Irish and Dublin in particular printings from the sort of late 17th, early 18th century as well. Then of those 25,000 books, about 400 of the items are unique. So you can see this lovely, the only known copy of the Rule of St. Francis in Irish, printed in Louvain in 1618. That's what this image is. And we have quite a lot of manuscript material, both in Irish and in English relating to Ireland that you might be quite interested in. So we have an astronomical treatise in Irish that dates back to the 14th century. We have a county by county survey of land granted to Cromwellian soldiers in the 1650s, and lots of material that maybe is kind of less well known. I think maybe the kind of our 4 main collections, having belonged to individual collectors, are probably the best known aspect of our collection. Then, as I said, our first librarian was a French Huguenot who sought refuge in Ireland, and as well as bringing his books, he brought his own personal papers, and we have a collection of his letters here, and then also the papers relating to the Reformed Church in La Rochelle, where he was from. So we have a lot of material related to Huguenots. A particularly nice collection of depositions and other material that was being collected by a friend of Bourreau's called Abram Tessereau, as sort of evidence of persecution of the French Huguenots. Then as well, having that connection, a lot of papers of the kind of Irish Huguenot presence ended up in Marsh's. So we have the accounts of the French Charity School, the Huguenot Poor Fund, and lots of other kinds of material related to them. We have our own institutional archive, so that's our visitors' books, our donations books, all of that kind of thing. So a glimpse of collecting practices in Ireland dating back to the 18th century and up to now. And then the Benjamin Ivy collection at Farmley is also owned by Marsh's, and that's particularly strong in Irish related material. So early editions of books by people like James Joyce and Swift, and then works of Sean O'Casey, but also surprisingly quite a few instructional booklets on kind of like Irish grammars and things like that, and very early printed editions of those. So where to start? As everyone has kind of said up to this point, the catalogue is probably the best place to start. But before that, if you've already kind of thought about your research inquiry and you already know what you want to ask, you can just get in contact with us immediately. So you can email readingroom@marshlibrary.ie and that will come to me. But alternatively, the catalogue. So quite a simple user interface. You can search by title, author, subject, and it's available through the landing page of our main website. So here's just an example of the search results. I've actually just searched the entire catalogue for this, but you can see you've got kind of different facets. You can search by collection, by what you would expect, sort of author, language, subject, all of that kind of material. And then we have this nice timeline at the beginning, so you can really kind of visualize what area you want to hone in on. Then consulting the collection, so the usual approach. So when we are open from the 5th of January and hopefully going forward, what you would do is you would make an appointment first of all. As Martin was saying, it's kind of important to get in contact with the archive or library rather than just turning up. So if you check out the research section of our website, so again, on our main kind of the landing page of the website, over on the right-hand side, you'll see a tab that says research, and this will kind of tell you everything that you need to know. So email to set up an appointment. It gives you our opening hours, but with the caveat, as others have said, you know, we probably won't maintain our normal opening hours for the first while anyway. So do bear in mind that these will change, but there will be updates on the website kind of outlining exactly what our opening hours are. Then there's also a link down there to the reading room regulations. This is quite handy to have a look at, particularly if you haven't really been to reading rooms, to library or archive reading rooms before, and you're not really 100% sure what to expect. It'll be things like you have to leave your bag in the locker. You can only bring pencils and devices and paper into the reading room, that you'll be recorded on CCTV and all that kind of thing. And then we'll have documentation for you to sign in. But again, just a reminder that this doesn't really apply at the moment. So then, what is available digitally? So as Kate and Katherine and Martin have all mentioned, catalogues are vitally important, the best place to be starting your research. And all of our records are up on ESTC, USTC, and ISTC. Then also some of our Irish language manuscripts have been digitized and are available through Irish Script on Screen. So this is our lovely 14th century astronomical treatise. There's also Queen Elizabeth's Irish Primer, which was produced for Queen Elizabeth and includes, I think, 6 Irish expressions along with their Latin and English, has been digitized. That's part of the Farmley collection and is also on ISOS, the Codex Kilkenniensis, and a few other items out there. As Katherine was saying, exhibitions can be a really nice way to get a sense of what's in our collections, what might be relevant to you. And we at the moment have 9 of them up on our website. So again, just kind of through the main website, the second tab is online exhibitions, and they're on the ones that we have up at the moment are on an array of subjects. So the Unicorn and the Fencing Mouse is all about marginalia and material evidence. Then we have books related to people who've read in the library and what they were reading, and the archival material we have that helps us piece together what they've been reading. And then we also have a lovely exhibition on the Jewish books, and then on these findings. And there is a link through the online exhibitions to get to the Irish Screen as well, where Irish manuscripts. And that's just a little glimpse of a couple of the books that feature in the Unicorn and the Fencing Mouse. As Kate mentioned initially, social media is a good place to see what we're kind of what collections we have, what we're up to in the library, to keep abreast of things like opening hours that'll change and everything. And as I think it was Kate who said that libraries and archives are really using these quite heavily at the moment to promote either newer collections, or for us, it's collections that we've had for hundreds of years, but that not a huge amount of research has been done on, or that aren't particularly known. So on the left, you can see a nice a prescription that was written in La Rochelle in 1677 and was part of the collection that came to Ireland with Eli Broho. And we have about 150 or 200 of these prescriptions. We also have material related to 18th century Cork, and then sometimes we also just post nice things like as bookmarks. So while we've been closed, we've been doing a stock check of the Stillingfleet collection. So those 10,000 books that formed the core of the library back in 1707, and as well as just checking to make sure that the materials there, we have been checking for material evidence, for provenance notes, and just material that we can use to upgrade the catalogue, because as everyone has mentioned, catalogues are vitally important and they can give you a lot of information even if you can't get your hands on the material at the moment. But as well as upgrading the catalogue, we also have a bank of photographs of markings and of this provenance evidence. So things like we've been taking pictures of the end papers and the title page and any annotations found. And while this material isn't it's not on a public platform at the moment, we have a kind of a bank of it. It's all stored on drives, and we're thinking about how we will link this at a later stage into the catalogue. But for the moment, if you were interested in any of this, you can kind of get in contact with us. So you can see here, we discovered we have a copy of the Life of Philip Neri that belonged to John Donne, which we didn't realize that wasn't recorded in any of our physical or online catalogues. We found this lovely inscription in Spanish. There's been mounds of manuscript and printed waste and just lovely doodles. So all of this kind of at your disposal. The thing is, it's all been, while it's available, while it's being stored on drives, it's being stored by shelf mark. That's how we're how it's all being arranged. So it means that what you would need to do is have a look in the catalogue, see if there's any material in the Stillingfleet that seems of interest to you, and then get in contact with us, and we could furnish you some of the images that might be related to the study. But it's not organized by subject, so you couldn't just contact us and say, can you send me all of your photographs of manuscript waste? Unfortunately, not at the moment anyway. But going forward, as I think Martin said, we will continue to respond to inquiries. So, you can get in contact with us, and we can take photographs of material and provide digitized images for you. I will say the one thing is we might charge kind of to cover staff time, but again, as Martin said, if the images have been taken previously for another related to another inquiry or for our own needs or whatever, we're very happy to provide them to you. And then like a lot of places, we've kind of had a rethink while we've been closed, and we've prioritized digitization now, and we're kind of we're on the road, just starting out more systematic digitization. So at the moment, I'm not in the reading room because it's being used to digitize the Broho correspondence and those prescriptions that I showed you earlier. And the plan is then for those to initially be kind of embedded into the catalogue. So our Deputy Director, Sue, is tinkering around with how that will work. This is an example of something that she's working on at the moment, displaying our processional of Sarah Muse. And that's sort of our big plan for the next year anyway, is to really get up and running on digitization and make as much of our unique and manuscript material available as possible. So just before finishing, if you have any questions related to anything that I've discussed today, you can email me directly, or about inquiries or anything like that. And then just a reminder that the reading room will reopen on the 5th of January. And if you want to make any appointments, you can email me at Marsh. Thank you, and best of luck with your PhD, whatever level of it you're at. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Amy. While you're there, we have had one question, very specific question to Marsh's library, which is whether it's necessary to make an appointment under normal circumstances or just because of the pandemic.
No, sorry, I should have made that clear. It's always necessary to make an appointment. But the thing is, we do kind of have this dual role where we have the reading room downstairs. So if somebody wants to come in and consult any of our material, they need to make an appointment. But then we do also have our galleries open upstairs for visitors, so people can just come in and walk around and see our exhibition. So we have a nice little Christmas exhibition on at the moment, for example, and we're open Fridays and Saturdays normally to the public upstairs, and then you can make an appointment from Tuesday to Thursday. But yeah, any consultation of material will require an appointment to be made.
Thank you very much indeed for clarifying that. We've had actually a question has just come in, but we had a couple of other questions on this issue, and it's about the extent to which researchers in one particular university are able to get access to a range of different libraries. There is a question here about interlibrary loans, but there's also, I think, a broader question which we had before, which was about rights of access. And I'm conscious that there's the ALKID card you can have, and also the SCONAL system. But I'm wondering perhaps if perhaps Kate, as a university employee, whether you could say something about the extent to which researchers across the universities are able to access libraries.
Generally, with archives, while something like an ALCID card might get you into a library, it might not get you into the archives. And largely because that doesn't mean you can't get into the archives, it just means there's another process to go through. And that's largely because we have to explain rules and procedures to people and make sure that they understand how to use archives, how to handle material. If you come into us, you have to sign documentation about understanding copyright, your responsibilities under copyright and GDPR legislation. And most archives will maintain some kind of register of researchers, and from that they know who's using what's been taken out. So it's tracking material, make sure that it's been taken out, that it's been returned, etc. So you may be able to get into a university library, but not be able to get into a university archives without a further step. All university archives, as far as I'm aware, allow anybody to go into their archives. So it's just a process issue. It's not that you can't go in to see the material.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I was going to make that point that I think overwhelmingly, the opportunity is there to gain access to libraries and archives, but there are just different processes in place which may need you to make contact with the organisation in advance. There is a specific question we've had in the chat about universities charging for interlibrary loans and whether or not university libraries have considered going over to what local authorities do, which is, I assume, is not to charge. I'm not sure we've got anybody on the panel who has budgetary control that would allow them to make that decision. But I think it's a valid point. But I guess if I had the UCC librarian here, he'd be looking at me and saying, well, we've just had a huge budget cut. Where do you expect me to get my money from? But I think it is certainly a valid point, but it's also, of course, really useful to have the interlibrary loan service available, particularly during the pandemic. And I know a lot of material has been made available to researchers that way. I don't know if anybody would like to follow up on that. I'm giving you the opportunity, any of our panelists.
I can't say that I know what the situation on this is, but my colleagues in the UCD library will know. But I would suggest that seriously that this is something that student representatives should bring up with their libraries. It's not. You have the right to make suggestions. You may be told it's not possible, but you should still make the suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. I am conscious of time here. We're actually slightly over time now, and I'm going to be handing back very shortly to Niamh to wrap proceedings up. I would like to say a big thank you to our four panelists. I've found it really interesting and enlightening to hear the presentations, and I was reflecting on my early days as a doctoral researcher, which is quite some time ago now. But of course, it was in an era when digital collections and archives were really not available, and often catalogues were not necessarily available online. But I suppose the early experiences of a doctoral researcher can often be quite bewildering, because suddenly you're going into all of these different institutions and you're having to get used to the different systems, the different cataloguing. But I think the key thing now, and I think all of our presenters have really emphasized this, is about planning. It's about taking the time to plan your visit, and it's about making connections with the librarians and the archivists who are there to help you and who will be very, very helpful and very pleased to help. So it's about making those connections, that special ingredient that Katherine mentioned, of making contact in advance so that people can, in a sense, familiarize themselves with your requests and your needs as a researcher. And I would certainly recommend that as a very sensible first step. So thank you very much, everyone, indeed. I'm going to pass back now to Niamh.
Thanks a million, Chris, and thank you so much to the panelists. I was taking loads and loads of notes and getting huge amounts of information, and you know, it is just so fantastic to have that sense of openness in terms of being able to reach out to the community of archivists and librarians, and just to know how available you are to the doctoral research community and to the research community at large. That welcome is so much appreciated. So thank you very much. There was just one question that I wanted to address in terms of the ALSID system, in terms of accessing other libraries. And I just wanted to say that I think it's my understanding that the different university libraries are operating slightly differently in terms of access. And Kate, you might let me know if I'm incorrect in this. But just for example, the University of Limerick is allowing access to visiting researchers. You just have to email in advance. So I would say just at the moment, I would email the library in advance to make that appointment, rather than going with the ALSID card, just to make sure that you're looked after and that you have the access that you need at the time that you need it. Kate, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, one of the reasons why there may be restrictions is because of the hugely reduced capacity in the libraries because of having to enforce social distancing.
So the ALSID card, Holly, just so that you know, in normal non-global pandemic times, it's a great system where you can sign up. If you go to your library information desk at your own institutional library, they will fill in a card for you. It's called an ALSID card, and it allows you access to all of the different spaces. When you do get back into your own institutional library, you can go and get one of those ALSID cards, and it's brilliant because you might be, you know, even just wanting to go in and use that space or work with a colleague somewhere else. It's just a really, really helpful system. So hopefully that answers your questions. I would say, and I think that certainly at the moment, that principle of reaching out and just, you know, getting in touch with the librarians is just really helpful in terms of making sure that you have the support that you need. So it's up to me now just to thank again all of our panelists today. It's been an absolutely fantastic morning. We're thrilled with how many people have come, have attended. We hope it's been really valuable to you. We really want to know, I suppose, the next step for us is what you would like us to focus on the next time. What we were thinking about when we were putting this event together was we wanted kind of I suppose, a conceptual or a theoretical discussion that would help inform and connect you with the different people that are part of the Irish Humanities Alliance. And then a practical session which would look at some skills, some techniques, some practical information that would help inform your research. So we'd love to know from you, if you have ideas, if you can put them into the chat, that would be so valuable for us, or we will be circulating a survey afterwards, as I said. So, you know what you need. I know that your universities will of course be providing doctoral training around key issues, and that's absolutely very important, and your own departments will be as well. But I suppose we want to see what we can do in terms of having that all-island network of researchers from a whole range of different disciplines. You know, we have a particular resource there, and it is very valuable. I know that we find it very valuable as researchers working in academia, so we want to try and make sure that we're connecting with what our doctoral community needs as well. And I always say to, you know, PhD students when they come into UL that you're part of lots of different communities. You're working with your supervisor, of course, but you're also working with your department, then you're working with your university, you're working with your discipline at a global level and at an international level. But I hope that you will consider the Irish Humanities Alliance another community that you're part of, and that we can really help to connect with you and support you. So, whatever it is, whether it's things like funding, whether it's key conceptual issues or theoretical perspectives that you'd like us to work through, whether it's things like developing publications, we have a huge, range of expertise and insight available to us that we want to share with you. And I think in particular, the fact that we are an all-island body is so valuable, particularly at the moment, in making sure that we find connections. Discipline-specific research groups across researchers across the whole of Ireland, that's a brilliant idea, and thank you very, very much. I think that's the kind of thing that we really want to try and focus on, what we bring to the table, which is that all-island perspective. So thanks a million. That's definitely one that we'll be taking on board. Networking for PhD and early career researchers, another fantastic comment there. So thanks a million for those, and keep them coming. So I'm happy to hand over to Mel, unless Mel wants to say a couple of final words, just to thank the Royal Irish Academy, to thank Chris, to thank our speakers, and to thank you, our participants, for coming along for our first ever doctoral training event. I know we're really delighted with the participation, with how it's gone, and it's really emboldening us now for our next session. So Mel or Chris, if you want to pop in and say a few words at all.
Thank you very much, Niamh. I just wanted to echo what both you and Chris have already said. It was, I think the word you used was enlightening. It was two fantastic sessions. I certainly learned a lot from it, and I hope that is true of our attendees as well. We will be following up with everybody in relation to outputs from today's event, and as I say, the survey as well, just to see what the next steps are. The networking point is very important, and of course, if this was normal non-COVID times, we'd probably retire now to the back of the room for a coffee and a sandwich and make some of those connections with other researchers. But yeah, just to thank all of our panelists, for their excellent contributions, very concise sessions. And I'll just hand over to Chris if he wants to say a final word. I think you mentioned Chris there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mel and Niamh. Yeah, I mean, just a great pleasure to be involved in this morning's two sessions, and I learned a lot myself as a scholar and as a member of the Irish Humanities community. And I think what the IHA is able to do, it is able to give researchers right across the island opportunities to network with colleagues and to have access to the really constructive advice and expertise that we've been sharing this morning. So, please do look out for the next events that we'll be organising, and please keep the suggestions coming, because really, if we can run things that are going to be of great value and utility to researchers at all levels, that's really one of our major purposes. So thanks very much indeed.
And just to say happy Christmas to everybody, and stay safe, and follow us on Twitter. Thanks a million. Okay, thanks everybody. Goodbye. Mind yourselves.